Imagine you live in France in 1789, a few days before the revolution. Though you don't know that yet, the monarchy stands. The king is in place. Everything looks normal, about as normal as a marriage 5 minutes before the wife finds the messages. Quiet on the outside, already decided on the inside. The old world hasn't collapsed yet, but it's already dead. It just hasn't fallen over, and you're watching it live its last day. Watching Louis wake up, eat, hunt, and pretend this will last forever. Get comfortable. This is about to get interesting. The first and real reason it all fell apart wasn't the starving people, not the bookish intellectuals, not conspirators in basements. It was the nobility, their own kind, privileged to the marrow, a class that treated the state the way your useless brother-in-law treats your apartment. I live here, I eat here, pay for it? Huh. The French aristocracy of the late 18th century operated in permanent vacation mode at someone else's expense. Versailles wasn't the headquarters of a country. It was one endless corporate party, only without the corporation. Just the party. Feasts rolled one after another. They ate for hours, a lot, demonstratively, as if gluttony weren't a vice but a resume. Wine in the morning, wine at noon, wine instead of dinner, and wine after. Servants scrubbed the halls before dawn to erase the evidence of last night's festivities, so that by midday, everything shone again, and they could start over. Money flowed into silver plates, fabrics, jewels, fireworks, theaters, and a crowd of hangers-on whose only skills were bowing and begging. Private evenings regularly turned into what today would be marketed on adult websites with the label members only. Contemporary observers recorded total moral decay at court, not with outrage, just as they would record the weather. Partners changed like socks. Favorites rose and fell. Intrigue and bed were so intertwined that no one could tell where politics ended and adultery began. Scandal didn't destroy a reputation, it built one. The circle around Marie Antoinette distinguished itself in particular. Since then, her name has become shorthand for what's happening beyond the fence isn't my problem. All this celebration took place under conditions that don't match the textbook image of refined Versailles. 1,000 courtiers, plus several thousand servants lived in one building, and that building had no proper toilets. None. People used chamber pots. Officially, servants were supposed to empty them. In reality, the contents regularly flew out the windows straight into the garden. Because it was lazy, far, inconvenient, whatever. These aren't rumors. In the mid-18th century, a special royal decree was issued. Do not relieve yourselves out the windows. You don't issue decrees about things that never happened. Even after that, nothing really changed. Some courtiers didn't bother with pots or servants. They simply used dark corners of corridors, behind doors, in niches, on staircases. No embarrassment. Like your cat, only decorated with medals. The stench in the overcrowded palace was so strong that they tried to drown it in perfume. That's why contemporaries called it the perfumed court. Not because they loved fragrance, but because without 5 bottles per person, it was physically impossible to stay there. Against that background, it's easy to understand why romantic encounters were moved outside. In the bushes at least, there was the scent of jasmine, and you could pretend you were engaged in something elevated instead of simply fleeing the smell. Versailles was rotting, not metaphorically, literally. Beneath the silk and ceremony lay filth no perfume could mask. Hunting was another way to kill time, elevated to a kind of obsession. This wasn't going out for food. These were multi-day expeditions with thousands of people, dozens of carriages, cooks, musicians, and a supply train like a small army. State affairs waited, because first came the deer. Meanwhile, in the villages, people genuinely didn't know whether there would be bread tomorrow. The nobility didn't just live richly, they lived provocatively, like someone eating a steak in front of the starving and asking them to pass the salt. Taxes, 0. Responsibility, pin 0. Access to power, monopolized. Any attempt to redistribute even a fragment of that privilege ran into their collective, not a chance. The country drowned in debt while the court ordered the next fireworks display. That gap, between limitless indulgence at the top and boiling anger at the bottom, didn't make an explosion possible. It made it inevitable, just a matter of time. And there wasn't much time left. The second reason everything collapsed was the king himself. Not just a decorative symbol of the era, but its most precise diagnosis. Louis didn't merely close his eyes to what was happening at court. He led it, by personal example. His lifestyle was an instruction manual for the entire elite. Detailed, visual, no footnotes required. The king drank. A lot. And consistently. Wine in the morning the way a normal man reaches for coffee. The day doesn't start without it, and it doesn't end without it either. This wasn't weakness or the occasional lapse. It was routine. Moderation to him was like dieting for someone at an all-you-can-eat buffet for the first time. Why bother if it's all already paid for? If the table is set, eat. If it's poured, drink. Simple logic. Feasts in his presence ended late and never sober. He ate heavily, greedily, without breaks. Contemporaries specifically noted his love of rich, fatty food, as if he were less a king and more a construction foreman after a long shift. After such banquets, he would sink into a near vegetative state, from which only hunting or another woman could revive him. Hygiene did not particularly concern him. He could go weeks without bathing. Perfume and a fresh shirt solved the problem about as effectively as air freshener solves the problem in a public restroom. That is, it doesn't. But it creates the illusion. Even those who were well-disposed toward him remarked, "The man looks neglected." Not tragic, just neglected. There's no need to dwell separately on his mistresses. There were many. They changed easily, and no one hid it or felt ashamed. These weren't romances filled with sentiment and secret notes. It was logistics. A woman appeared, existed nearby until she became tiresome, then disappeared, leaving behind another knot of intrigue and an empty space in the bed. Lewis didn't consider it a problem. About the way you don't consider changing channels a problem. Switched, so what? But here's where the real circus begins. These mistresses meddled in state affairs. They influenced appointments, access to the king, his decisions and moods. And Lewis did not resist. He even liked it. Let them decide, as long as they didn't bother him. Governing was dull and required effort. Pleasure was close at hand and required nothing. He handed responsibility to whoever happened to be nearest at the moment. The way you pass a remote control, without thinking, just to free your hands. Hunting occupied a place in his life that a psychologist today might call dissociation, and an ordinary person would simply call escape. For weeks, sometimes months, he vanished on expeditions. People said without irony, if he isn't hunting, he's doing nothing. During those periods, the state hung in suspension. Papers waited. Decisions were postponed. Problems piled up like unwashed dishes after a week-long binge. Hunting gave the king what he wanted most, the ability not to think and not to be responsible for anything. That was exactly what he needed. Military campaigns looked much the same. What was officially called Operations in Flanders was in practice a traveling court with cannons somewhere on the horizon. He wasn't taken there to fight. He was taken as a ceremonial general, only more expensive and with a larger entourage. He did not command. His presence was meant to symbolize the grandeur of the monarchy. But in reality, he was a burden, costly, capricious, and useless. The king dragged along his favorite, Madame de Chateauroux, together with all her belongings, trunks, hat boxes, jars of rouge. At each stop, covered galleries were hurriedly constructed between her quarters and his, so they could pass at night without wetting their shoes. Behind them rolled kitchens, a horde of servants of every specialty, and separately, a theatrical troupe with props, instruments, and its own baggage. The entire column stretched nearly a mile and thundered down the roads like the relocation of a small city. Officially, it was moving to war. In reality, it serviced the habits of one man who simply did not know how to live otherwise. War was the backdrop. The king was the passenger. He was transported, fed, entertained, and carefully shielded from any contact with reality. Contemporaries described it with a sarcasm that no longer fit within the bounds of decorum. The country was at war. Its head drank, ate, hunted, and changed women. The system functioned, just not the way it was supposed to. The third reason for the revolution was you, or rather the people around you, the common people, those who had lived for years without rights, without any safety net, without even the faintest expectation that tomorrow might be better than today. Late 18th century France rested on the shoulders of people for whom the distance between an ordinary life and total collapse was one bad winter, one failed harvest, one spike in prices, and that was it. A fall with no protection. Food was brutally simple. Bread. That was the diet. Sometimes water. Sometimes a thin sludge generously called porridge. Meat wasn't food. It was an event, and only if luck intervened. A chicken. Something you grab in a supermarket today without thinking was for a vast number of Frenchmen something like a unicorn. Everyone knows it exists. Few have actually seen one. Many went their entire lives without tasting it. It simply wasn't meant for them. Bread was everything. The price of a loaf was the thermometer of public health. It rose. People started counting days. It disappeared. And what historians later politely called popular unrest began, which in reality meant hungry people with pitchforks. In the cities, lines formed before dawn. People rose in the dark to secure a place outside a bakery. Often, there wasn't enough for everyone. They went home empty-handed and angry, not from reading Rousseau, but from the sound of their own stomachs. Clothing reflected the same reality. People wore what barely held together. One coat for years, patched, resewn, handed down like an heirloom. Clean clothes were rare, like hot water in a crowded dormitory in the middle of summer. Shoes counted as luxury. Many walked in collapsing footwear or barefoot. In winter, that didn't mean romance and snow. It meant frostbite, illness, illness, and a grave. Housing was such that today a landlord would face prison for offering it. In cities, several families in one room. In villages, a hut with a dirt floor, smoke, dampness, and parasites included. Disease moved through like a draft, quickly and without permission. There was no money for doctors. You fell ill. Your problem. You lost your job. Same story. Social protection looked about as solid as support from an ex-husband. Theoretically, it existed. Practically, it did not. And through all this, they paid the taxes. Peasants, urban poor. Always and for everything. Nobles and clergy either paid nothing or paid symbolically, as if doing a favor. People saw this every day. You work the hardest, you receive the least. You pay for those who do not work at all. You don't need philosophy to understand that arithmetic. You just need to count to 3. Powerlessness came bundled with hunger, the way a hangover comes with drinking. Any ordinary person could be fined, punished, locked up, without explanation and without recourse. There was nowhere to complain. Courts cost money you didn't have. A conflict with someone in office always ended the same way. You lost. Fear wasn't background noise. It was the air. And over all of this floated the stories of how life was lived at the top. About feasts, hunts, mistresses, fireworks. The stories spread quickly, not through newspapers, but through markets, taverns, neighbors. The contrast required no explanation. You live on bread and water. They live on everything else. The conclusion draws itself. People did not read treatises or attend lectures, but they knew how to compare. Your empty bowl and someone else's overflowing table. That is not abstraction. It is daily reality, sharper than any propaganda. And the people endured for a long time. They were not revolutionaries at heart. They were ordinary people who wanted to eat, not freeze, and not bury their children too early. A modest wish list, really. But patience has a bottom. When bread disappears entirely, when a child cries from hunger, when the state seems to exist literally for everyone except you, anger stops being abstract. It becomes concrete, physical, and very hard to control. The revolution did not begin with elegant speeches in public squares. It began with empty pots, worn through souls, accumulated humiliation, and the realization that waiting made no sense anymore. People did not need theory, they needed food. And when it became clear that food would not come, and that the system functioned exclusively against them, the system simply broke. From below, it was smashed by people who had nothing left to lose. And those, as history repeatedly shows, are the most dangerous people of all.